as being of more importance, but I understand there's still so much happening. So we'll probably have to do this a couple times throughout the session. But Andres, you want to take us through?
Yes, absolutely. It's great to see all of you this afternoon. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of just run through the proposed legislative platform for 2022. I did want to provide a little bit of color commentary kind of just on the session and what's been happening thus far. As you all know, it is the second year of the 2-year legislative session. So 2021, 2022 legislative session. The 2-year bill House of Origin deadline is coming up on the 31st of January. So any bill that was introduced last year that's still in the House that it was introduced in will need to advance out of that House by the 31st of this month. So that's coming up very soon. Also, they were required to advance out of any sort of committee, whether policy committee or fiscal committee, in their House of Origin last week. So we are starting to see kind of that transition into, second House and everything repeating the same process. If it was an Assembly bill, now doing that in the Senate. If it was a Senate bill, doing that in the Assembly. Another thing to note is there have been a ton, as I'm sure you all know, of musical chairs in the legislature. Part of that is due to, the upcoming redistricting. So we now have our finalized district maps for state Senate, state Assembly, and Congress. So that's causing, some incumbents to run against one another, some changes, some retirements, some runs for a different office. So there's a lot going on around there. And then another item of note is that Assembly Member Berman now has the new chairmanship of the Assembly Business and Professions Committee, which is an important committee. So that's kind of a little bit of color commentary on what's happening right now. Now, in 2022, both the governor's administration and the legislature are maintaining focus on a lot of the same priorities as they did in 2021. Part of the reason being, it's the second year of a 2-year legislative cycle, a lot of the same issues. However, we have heard, that the top priorities, if we could really narrow it down into 4, are going to be climate resiliency, affordable housing, and I want to emphasize affordable, homelessness, and then crime/public safety. One thing that's kind of changed with the crime public safety is last year, there was a really big emphasis, and there will continue to be an emphasis on kind of the changing the way that, public safety is done and how perhaps departments operate at local levels, regional levels, state level, what have you. However, there is now, due to the increased trend in thefts, burglaries, what have you, kind of a sentiment within the Capitol community of we need to be a little bit tougher on certain crimes. So it's kind of there's going to be a balancing act, I think, in the legislature and the administration this year of continuing to go towards that more progressive trend and style of policing, while also focusing on addressing real issues that are happening kind of in crime. On our actual platform, we have much of what was listed last year, as I stated, similar priorities for the administration and the legislature. So, the key ones, the buckets, we could call them, that we have listed for Half Moon Bay are climate resiliency. That's one. Housing and affordable housing is another. Homelessness is another, because that kind of falls in its own, although it's tied with housing, it's kind of its own thing. Economic development, infrastructure, and that could be, infrastructure is going to be particularly relevant because the IIJA, of course, passed on the federal level. So, in the coming months and even years, we will be seeing a lot of trickle down to the state and, potentially really good funding opportunities for locals to access for infrastructure. So infrastructure, public safety, of course, and this is kind of public safety / crime. And then elections, once again, and then government transparency is another. So things having to do with the Brown Act. I will note You know, and we can talk a little bit more about this once we get into the legislation, the bill matrix. I will note that right now we haven't seen as much or heard as much of a kind of an urgency to introduce legislation or address issues with government transparency or the Brown Act. You know, there were a lot of bills on that last year and some bills that passed notably that kind of changed the way we do things. But this year, you know, we could see some more of that, but I should just note that at this point in time, we haven't seen the same sort of influx and flood of bills trying to address that as we did last year. But again, coming weeks, we could see a lot more. So that's, you know, high level overview of the legislative platform. Of course, there's, you know, bullets and numbers under each that go into a little more detail in order to, you know, be cognizant of everyone's time. I won't go into those specifically. You all, of course, have the ability to suggest any additions or removals of anything that is on the draft legislative platform. And I'm certainly happy to, you know, make those changes at your discretion prior to this going back to the full council. But with that, you know, I'll pause there, see if there's any questions, comments, or concerns from either of the subcommittee members.
I read through the platform and I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I would just, yeah, I think it's great. It's really thorough, and I think you did a great job last year. My only question is, are there things that we want added to bills? You know, I think we're really interested right now with our discussion on, you know, climate electrification, on, you know, tax credits and incentives, you know, for decarbonization, electrification generally, you know, for people who want to switch out appliances, either residences or businesses, something that will help advance, you know, decarbonization. You know, the state always says, yeah, we want to decarbonize by 2045 or 2050. And Senator Becker told me in a phone call a couple of months ago that, you know, he hoped to get some of that in legislation. But if there are opportunities for us to actually lobby to get things in legislation, as well as to just support or oppose, you know, I think we want to, you know, be able to do that too. You know, if there are opportunities, bill vehicles that might be, you know, worthy to proactively get stuff in there that we want, and just keep an eye out for stuff.
Absolutely.
Like
so, Madam Mayor, perhaps a suggestion is under the climate resiliency bucket to add another bullet point saying something along the lines of actively advocate for the implementation of, you know, certain tax credits or things to bolster out decarbonization and electrification within state
incentive
legislation.
Programs, rebates, you know, whatever. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I can certainly add something like that in there so it's on the platform.
Great. Otherwise, you know, it's pretty comprehensive. Do you see anything, Harvey?
No, as I said, it's comprehensive, as you said.
Okay, so I have my marching orders on that. I'll make sure to make those additions and you know, send back to the city manager and city clerk for their final overview prior to sending to the entire council and you too. So
I thought I would mention also, I think we benefit by supporting any bills that might also support the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, which is One Shoreline, called One Shoreline. That was set up, you know, by AB 825 there a couple of years ago. It was a Mullen bill. So I'm on that district, and you know, it has kind of an aggressive platform, and we've been talking with the district and who's working with Josh Becker on getting something in the budget for projects for that district. And one of the projects that Becker is considering is a project that we met with the district last week about, and that is what we're calling the Kehoe Watershed Enhancement and Stewardship Project, which is designed to eliminate flooding in part of our town and also protect the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast Side wastewater treatment plant. So I think we want to keep an eye out if there's any legislation dealing with the flood and sea level rise district, also known as One Shoreline. We want to be able to support that as well, because we have the potential to benefit from that, as do other San Mateo County communities.
Absolutely. I'll make sure to add something along those lines.
And that would be under the resiliency category, if that wasn't clear, Andres.
Got it. Absolutely. Okay. There are no other questions or comments on the platform. I'm happy to transition, if appropriate, over to the legislative matrix. Great. So I'll start off with just a little bit more color commentary on legislation prior to jumping into it. And I'll also note that there's a number of bills on this legislative matrix that are 2-year bills from last year that are now in the second house that have had no amendments since we last took a position. So in the interest, again, of everyone's time, I will not go over those unless you ask me to subsequent to, me talking through the other bills. But some color commentary on legislation. So this point right now, we've had roughly 170 bills introduced in 2022. So that may seem like, a decent amount of bills. However, the average amount of bills introduced per year is over 1,000, as you all well know. So bill introduction deadline is February 18th. So in the next few weeks, we are likely to see maybe 1,000 more bills introduced. So our team here in Sacramento is going to do a lot of digging and a lot of work sifting through those, seeing what's relevant based on the legislative framework that we've established and the interests of the city. Of course, at this point in time, as Bob referenced earlier, it is a little bit slower, though starting to pick up now again, due to kind of a very large COVID outbreak in the Capitol, where a number of legislators and then many staff were infected and sick for a while. And now everyone's getting back to work. So that's part of the reason why there's only 170 out right now, roughly. And then on top of that, it's the second year of the 2-year cycle, and we have a few more weeks until the bill introduction deadline. So that's some color commentary. Now jumping into legislation, I will start with some newly introduced, or actually I should start off with an amended bill. So AB 14.
Andres, could I interrupt just briefly?
Sure.
I don't know exactly how this fits into our platform, and I know it's incredibly divisive, but I would advocate strongly that we support AB 1400, the single payer healthcare plan. I really think, as a matter of equity, this is what really should be passed. Ideally, the federal government should support it, but if we could get it passed in California, I think that would be an impetus to the rest of the country. And I strongly support it, and I hope that the city of Half Moon Bay can send a letter to the legislature saying that we do in fact support AB 1400.
I agree with Harvey on that one.
Okay.
I've already, I think, endorsed it, but I think it's a good idea.
Certainly. So that is something that I can add to our tracking matrix. I can also, write a draft for council's consideration in support of the legislation.
That would be great.
So I'll make sure to do that. Great.
Thank you, Andres.
No problem. So Assembly Bill 1445 by Assembly Member Levine. This would essentially do the following. So impacts caused by climate change, including, wildfire risks, sea level rise, evacuation issues, what have you, will need to be factored in to the RENA process. So, essentially what this bill is saying is when RENA numbers are established and given out to communities, you know, sea level rise, wildfire, other climate impacts are going to need to be factored in. And that would commence on January 1 of 2025. So the next cycle. So that's one bill. This bill was recently amended to the current language that I just shared. So it is on the assembly floor. It's a bill that, you know, is in its house of origin. So my suggestion, if council does want to take a position on this piece of legislation, whatever that position may be, is to wait until it's heard on the assembly floor so we know if it is in fact advancing this year. And if so, that would be an appropriate time to take a position. But certainly happy to note either of your thoughts on the subcommittee so I can at least have that in my notes, you know, for future consideration.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Could I back up one bill, please?
Sure, absolutely.
AB 988. 9888.
Yes.
That would establish 988 as a suicide prevention one.
Correct.
Okay. I'm opposed to that. Not that I'm in favor of suicide, but you know, we have just are about to approve a CARES so-called policy that would allow us to respond to 911 calls that involve mental health issues. And I think diluting the emergency response of 911 with 988 is not a good idea. I think that all the ideas that 988 espouses are good ideas, but I don't think there should be a separate number because people in an emergency think 911. They don't think 988, even if there's going to be an educational campaign. So I would like to amend or oppose. I don't know what to say, but I don't like the idea of a separate emergency response number for suicide prevention.
What bill number are you talking about?
It's cleverly called AB 988, not an accident.
So, council member and mayor, I'm happy to provide a little bit of context on the status of kind of the 988 hotline and what's resulted of this legislation. So the legislation itself was stalled as a 2-year bill in its second house. There was a lot of support, also a good amount of opposition, highly publicized bill. The governor in the 2021 budget and the legislature decided to allocate, and I can't recall off the top of my head, but a certain amount of $1 million in order to help start up the 988. So that was done through the budget process, through the budget trailer bill process, and essentially language was implemented there and funding was allocated there. But that is just to sort of get something rolling, if you will. So ongoing funding for a program such as that does not yet exist. So the reason, while, you know, this program will essentially get started in some capacity due to prior funding from the budget, the reason I did leave this on here for your consideration, and I've now heard, you know, the statements that you've made on position, but the reason we left it on here is because there is a possibility that they continue forward with some version of this legislation. So I did want to provide that context. And in addition to that, you know, I'll just say that your new commentary on this legislation is noted with the context you provided. So certainly hear that. And yeah,
I'm a little bit different from Harvey on this, in that I don't know if I oppose it or not. I would want like more information from our own, you know, mental health service providers on what their opinion about that is, and maybe the county and the city manager. You know, I'm not sure of the value of either one of those. We need one,
Mhm.
but I don't think I'd want to oppose it until I have more information about, what our partners think about it and what their reasoning is.
We'll look into it. I was recently at a meeting, and I'm forgetting what meeting it was, but it was just last week. And an expert in the mental health field was speaking at this meeting. My meetings start to blur together. And I thought, she said that this is actually replacing a line that already exists. There already is a suicide prevention line in the state of California. And this is making it easier by making it 3 numbers. Now, to Councilmember Rarbeck's point, maybe that confuses things by making it like 911. But that's what she said, was that this is simply replacing a number that already exists, and that the purpose of that line, what that line has always been and would continue to be, is different than our local response. This one's for, what's available to the person who calls the line is to talk to someone at any hour and simply talk to someone if they're having ideas of suicide, and that has proven to be helpful. But we will look into that more to answer that question. But that's what I heard from a mental health clinician last week in a meeting I was at.
That's
Yeah,
great
I'd like
context.
to get more information. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can certainly mark this down, Councilmember and Mayor, as a watch, and then, decide once we're able to provide you with greater information, and as the process moves along, everyone can kind of make a more informed decision based on what we understand the latest is.
That makes sense to me. Thanks.
Perfect.
Yeah, the funding is wonderful. It's just the mechanism for how to actually respond, whether it's, and I think everyone knows 911, you call in an emergency. And if we get emergency money allocated to help with mental health response, that's where I'm coming from, what I would like to have enacted.
Got it. Noted, council member. So I'm sorry, did the subcommittee make comment on a potential position for AB 1445, which factors into the RENA numbers, risks, climate change risks?
Yeah, I lean toward support. It is so it has been amended. Is this one of the bills that needs to get out to the other house by the 31st?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. So it is on the floor of the first house.
Legs. Yeah, it makes sense to me that we have to deal with, locating housing and safe places. So I lean towards support, but let's see what happens.
Absolutely. Can do. And so, council members, if it makes it easier, I'm actually happy to share my screen. Is that something
do that?
Yeah, share your screen.
Okay. Will do. Let's see here. Share screen. Legislative subcommittee change. Share. All right. That is not. Are we able to? What is showing up?
We're looking at AB 1445 and AB 1640.
Okay, so you can see that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, so AB 1640. This is a bill by Assemblymember Ward. I will also note that this bill is the same language and same exact thing as a bill by Assemblymember Mullins, AB 897, which we also have on here. That is the 2-year bill. So this is kind of just another option of a bill if the other doesn't continue to move on or it's not something that they push. And essentially what it is it authorizes eligible entities to establish and participate in a regional climate network. So, that would include, local jurisdictions to establish and participate in a regional climate network. And I believe, and I'll check, that is a bill, again, the AB 897 by Assemblymember Mullen, same exact text. That's a bill that the council has previously supported. So providing that context to you all.
I think on that bill, I'm wondering if, I think I recall there's a connection with the regional resilience entities and SB1. So I'm guessing that the governor's budget or the budget bills out of the Senate and Assembly will have funding for SB1 purposes, which was, I think it included potential funding for, regional networks and also government agencies to amend plans to account for sea level rise and climate resilience and that stuff. So I think we want to keep an eye on these, and I think maybe just watch for the time being, but would probably lean support. But I want to see how it might affect the one shoreline district that we're part of here in San Mateo County. And then I certainly want to monitor any funding that might be available through SB1 from last year for these sorts of purposes. That's kind of convoluted, but.
Will do. Okay, so I have that down as a watch. So moving along, AB 1648. This one, quite frankly, subcommittee members, I'm not sure if it really applies to the city, but it is something that could have implications for local jurisdictions. So I did add it on there for now. And it would require the owner of a kennel, so an animal kennel, to submit to the city and county an animal and natural disaster evacuation plan for any kennel covered by the license or permit in that local jurisdiction. Wondering if there are any thoughts on that, or if that is just a watch or take off.
I think it's a watch for now, but certainly, there are a lot of stables. There are a couple stables in Half Moon Bay, but there are other stables in the Mid-Coast that are, up on the hillsides, very close to, eucalyptus groves that could easily burn.
Okay.
And also, south of us. So it would certainly benefit our partners, I think. So we want to be prepared to maybe support, but I would say, watch in the meantime.
My comment that I had was too much bureaucracy. I don't see that this is a sensible use of money for evacuation purposes. So I would oppose it or just ignore it. But
I see who it's coming from, and it's coming from a guy who represents an area, where there's a lot of horsey activity and stuff for sure. So, it looks kind of like a district bill based on what I know the author. But I would just say watch for now and just see if.
Okay. Yeah. So no action on it currently, and I'll just make sure to keep my eye on it. Moving right along, Assembly Bill 1653. This is by Assembly Member Patterson, and this is kind of digging in and diving in to the addressing crime issues. So what this bill would do is include vehicle part theft as a property crime for the purposes of when California Highway Patrol and Department of Justice come together to make decisions about where in California locally which local law enforcement groups they would give resources to address certain issues. This would include vehicle part theft as something that they could help, provide funding for to local law enforcement agencies. So simply adding that little caveat in there. Not sure if that's something that's particularly relevant in the city. However, thought I would include due to the, ongoing focus of that issue.
There are problems on the coast side. People are stealing, like catalytic converters and stuff. So I would say, I don't know, what do you think, Harvey? Support?
I wrote down oppose because I just am worried about this new emphasis on crime, that we're heading down the slippery slope of spending money on, crime where the real problem is not crime. The real problem is public safety and the way it's enforced. So I'm not in favor of this bill.
Well, I am. So to split the baby, let's say watch.
Okay.
Okay. Noted.
Splitting the baby is also illegal, by the way.
Noted on the watch position. Okay, moving along. Senate Bill 45. So this is actually a bill that we had on previously, this bill number. So the vehicle we were tracking last session, and what it originally was going to be a climate bond. So climate resiliency bond allocating X billion dollars for various climate related projects. As you all know, the 2021 state budget included 3.7 something billion dollars for climate resiliency over 3 years. Most of it has not even been appropriated in the term in grant programs within various agencies. So a lot of it still needs to be fleshed out. The money's been allocated from the legislature, but departments and agencies need to figure out how to spend that, what grant programs it goes to. So this bill was originally going to fund climate resiliency projects, grants, what have you. It was a gut and amend. So, completely stripped and new language inserted in it to expedite, another bill. And what it now does is could provide funding to local governments for their organic waste reduction compliance goals. So as you all know, there's Senate Bill 1383 from a number of years ago, which requires certain organic waste reduction goals that all local jurisdictions need to meet. There has been, a lot of talk about some difficulty with reaching that for a number of jurisdictions up and down the state. So what this bill is really aiming to do is set the framework to allow there to be a funding mechanism for local jurisdictions to help reach that. It would be based on appropriation in the state budget, but what this is really doing is setting kind of that framework, context, what have you, and more than likely this would just be implemented in a budget bill or budget trailer bill with all the language in there. But this is the legislative version.
Yeah, as it stands, 1383 was basically an unfunded mandate. So this, provides some correction of that. I would support it.
Me too.
Excellent. Support it is.
Andres, did we skip SB 6?
Yeah, so SB 6, the reason I skipped it is the reason I'm skipping the other 2-year bills. It has had no changes since the last time we went over it. I'm happy to discuss it or just go over it if you'd like, but it's a 2-year bill in its second house, and there's been no amendments since we last discussed it. It's currently just sitting there and probably will sit for a little while longer as everyone focuses on new bills. Though, council member, if you'd like to discuss it, I certainly can.
I think that the emphasis on density in that bill is not a good thing, and I would oppose it. But I'd love to hear what Debbie has to say.
Is it part of your plan here? Part of your matrix? I don't see
it. It is. I'm sorry, I'll scroll up.
Yeah.
There we are.
So
did we take a position last year? Did the committee take a position last year? And
it was watch.
So last year it was a watch.
Okay.
No, I don't feel strongly that watch is a bad position, but.
And Harvey, why did you oppose it? Why do you oppose it?
With the emphasis on density, it may not be appropriate in all housing situations, and this doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, but it talks about housing in commercial zones, and our updated LCP, does allow mixed use in all of our commercial zones right now. People can build housing over the shopping centers. People can build housing over Shoreline Station, over the the Half Moon Bay Coffee Shop over by the bridge. So, I mean, it basically reflects, what we're already doing. So I certainly wouldn't oppose it. I mean, this is what we approve. Maybe I'm wrong. Am I wrong about that, Bob?
No, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. In fact, I've been reviewing certain elements of our local coastal plan because I'm doing this presentation tomorrow on housing. And that's my understanding, is that we completely allowed mixed use in commercial zones. So if I don't know this bill that well, but if this is just doing something that we've already done, I can have Jill look at that.
Yeah. No, I agree with Debbie that density in commercial zones is a good thing. And maybe I misread this. It seemed to me when I just skimmed the description here that it was encouraging density everywhere. And
That's SB 9.
okay. All right. 6-9 is.
Yeah, council member, to completely hear where you're coming from, because Senate Bill 6 was sort of grouped in as this group of what was called the Senate housing package. So it was grouped in sort of with SB 9, SB 10, and some of those other big ticket item housing bills. So I could certainly understand, where you're coming from. There's a good amount of confusion around that. So
this one seems like it would be less controversial than SB 9. So it's interesting that this one got lost in the shuffle, where SB 9 is hugely controversial.
Mm-hmm. So my understanding is that, not all, but the legislature in general, kind of towards the end of session, really wanted to focus in on the key ones that they wanted to pass. So it was kind of not so much leaving the less controversial ones in the dust just for the sake of leaving it in the dust, but more, I think, so they could allocate additional effort and time on certain pieces of legislation that were on their priority agenda.
Got it.
Okay.
So with this, is it safe to say it just continues as a watch for now, and if things pick up, we can revisit that? Okay. Yeah. Excellent.
It doesn't
right.
really affect us at this point, so we can just leave it as watch.
Okay. So now moving along to let's see here. We're going to move along to the next one that's relevant at this moment, and that is Senate Bill 833 down here by Senator Dodd. So Community Energy Resilience Act of 2022. This would essentially provide funding for local governments to develop and implement community energy resilience plans and expedite permit review for distributed energy resources by local governments. So, it is kind of along the same vein and similar legislation to another bill we referenced previously, and also similar to another bill that I will reference coming up, another one on climate resiliency. And this is sort of, a potential funding mechanism for the community resilience plans.
I would say support.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Could I back up just 1 minute here? On SB 612, I'm a little confused. It seems to me it's dealing with reallocating PCIA. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so a mechanism to allow, for example, community choice aggregators to acquire or purchase electrical resources off of electrical corporations.
Okay, when I read the words, I'm really confused, but apparently we had supported it in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So I assume we vetted this, and it makes sense to allocate the PCIA for our PCE. So I'm okay with it. I was just confused by reading the words. It's not crystal clear, let's put it that way. But if we had decided last year that this was a good position to support, then That's fine with me. I was just curious as to the silly word, or not so confusing words.
Yeah. Do you want me to Harvey to send a quick email to either Jan or Mark Hertzman and just ask them what PCE, what their position is on this? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, it would.
Okay.
Be.
Sure.
I have this vague recollection that everybody was in support of it.
Yeah, I'll send a quick email to Mark and just see if he just pings me back and says, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer.
Okay.
So Councilmember, what I'll do though in the interim is just to note that, you know, that Bob will check in on this. So we can kind of maybe revisit this at a later time once we get, you know, renewed information. So I'll just denote that on my list.
Okay.
And that's 612, right?
612.
Correct. Senate Bill 612.
SB 612.
Got it.
Okay. Now let's go back. We're on the last few, so not too much longer. Senate Bill 843 by Senator Glazer. So on taxation, this would essentially increase the amount of credit, tax credit for qualified renter to $1,000. Where currently, I believe it states there, it's $120.60 based on the person. This is essentially just increasing a tax credit for very low income people. It's a pretty straightforward bill.
And I think we should support it.
Me too.
Okay. Support. All right. Senate Bill 864. This one, I will just state before the subcommittee that I need to get a little bit more clarity from the author and his staff on exactly what this bill is trying to do. I've done my best read of it, but I do need to check in, I feel, in order to provide the best information possible. But essentially, I believe the goal is to allow for the delivery of alcohol from brick and mortar locations to someone, and not just through a third-party delivery app. So what it essentially says is authorize the delivery of alcohol beverages to consumers away from the licensed premises if specified conditions are met. But I do need to, I feel like in order to provide you the full context of what this bill is trying to do, I should check in with the author's office.
Doesn't really seem like it's part of our platform. Where does it fit in on our platform?
So I think more than anything, the reason why this was added was more in the scope of economic development with respect to local businesses, perhaps.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
So, you know, if a local business wants to be able to deliver, and obviously the delivery is allowed through third-party applications, but if they have, let's say, a delivery mechanism themselves, someone that works in-house, brick and mortar, wants to go deliver, that's what this bill, at least based on my read, would be trying to do. So economic development, Bob, to answer your question.
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah. I believe this is a continuation of the emergency COVID idea. And
You're correct.
And, you know, alcohol is a big profit center for restaurants, and I think it makes sense that they be allowed to sell cocktails to people who get ordered.
And you're absolutely right, council member. My understanding is that it is kind of building off of the currently existing emergency regs that were put into place during COVID for the delivery of alcohol, and kind of, you know, making things put into statute.
Yeah.
So noted on both the subcommittee members' position. And I'll also, just to make sure everything's, you know, exactly as I stated, I will check in with the author's office to ensure that, you know, I have all the right context, and that is in fact what this bill's goal and intent is. So just making sure we're comprehensive. All right, last two. Senate Bill 847 by Senator Hurtado. This is COVID-19 relief grant program. Essentially what it does, based on the current text, is it creates another rental assistance grant program for landlords under the Department of Housing and Community Development. And that's quite simply it. It would, be based as any upcoming grant program would be based on appropriation by the legislature. So we would have to see kind of how things are fleshed out in the budget, what have you. But this would, be creating another mechanism for rental assistance for landlords under HCD.
So to clarify, it's to benefit landlords as opposed to tenants.
That is correct.
Yeah, it's a little,
it's a little odd, isn't it?
A little misleading, but
Yeah.
Yeah, the title, yes.
Well, certainly, landlords need help too. If people aren't paying their rent and they're on assistance programs, landlords are taking a hit too. Although I'm more concerned about mom and pop landlords than I am about BlackRock, who's renting out, private equity buying and renting out houses and things like that. So I'm leaning sort of about not supporting it, maybe opposing it, but for now watching it. I don't want to spend money toward private equity landlords.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Madam Mayor, I can dig in a little deeper, and then we'll also have to see, how the language develops throughout, the process, because language could be, drafted in a way where it is geared towards the mom and pops and not towards, large commercial landlords or private equity firms or what have you. So I do think it's prudent, as you stated, to kind of watch for now, see how this develops. But certainly just with the, policy topic that it deals with, it's something that's probably of interest. But, watching for now is probably the best course of action. So I concur with you on that. Councilmember, did you have any comments on that?
No, I agree with Debbie. And the title of the bill is a little misleading. Yeah, we should watch it, and if at all possible, have it restricted to mom and pop landlords would be ideal.
Yeah, it'll be key to see how they develop, qualified applicants, what that means, So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So last bill on our list that we're going to go over, Senate Bill 852, another one by Senator Dodd, and another one that does have to do with climate resiliency. So this bill would essentially authorize a city, county, special district, or any combination of those to form a climate resiliency district. And that is my understanding that's already allowed. But the addition to this one is that the purpose would be to raise and allocate funds for eligible projects and the operating expenses of those eligible projects. So the funding mechanism is what's new in this. So essentially saying, these climate resiliency districts that are formed between various local jurisdictions, they now have the ability to, levy funds to support any of their projects.
Yeah, it sounds like it's worthy of support. But I would say watch for now and see how these various competing resilience bills shake out. So I'd like the idea of the funding mechanism, but I would rather just take a watch position for the moment.
Is one shoreline defined as a climate resilience district?
Well, it's difficult to, it could be, but, there are some people pushing for, agencies like MTC to be the regional district and to take that on. What people are worried about is the scale, MTC to me, I don't know. If it were the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority that covers the same district, I'd be more inclined to support them. So I just want to see kind of, where they're coming down in terms of scale, regional, local, regional planning agencies like MTC or Sandbag or, whatever. I just want to take a look at it. I'd like to check in with folks at One Shoreline too, to see what they're thinking. They use the county's lobbyists. I don't think they even know what's going on yet, but I would just say watch for the time being.
Okay.
All right. So subcommittee members, that concludes the overview of our preliminary bill matrix. I've got a lot of notes here. I've got a lot of marching orders. I'll be able to amend and update this matrix per, kind of what you stated. And then on the legislation where there was a definitive suggested position, what I can do is work with the city manager and the city clerk on drafting up some letters with those positions reflected. And then, of course, they can be brought to the council for consideration. And then I will also, of course, make the additions that were suggested on the legislative platform. So that will be reflected, and I'll send that to the city manager and city clerk so that council can give its final stamp of approval on that as well.
And that would be February 1st or the 15th?
I have it scheduled for. No, I have it scheduled for March 1st, but we could certainly move it up. I don't know why I had it so far back. But yeah, if it's ready for the 1st, we could certainly do it then.
And by then too, the introduction deadline will have passed. And
just barely.
Yeah.
I did have one suggestion with the platform and then the AB 1400. I don't know if the committee wants to add a section in the platform around healthcare, social equity, or something of that nature, where if there are any other types of bills like this as a result of the pandemic, then we're able to send any position letters.
Yeah, I would actually include health and health equity. Yeah, I think that's going to be a developing area. Right. So I think your point's well taken on that.
Okay, so we can add that, and then that way any future bills will be able to send the letter under the platform versus taking the letter for approval to the council.
Good.
I will make sure that is added. Thank you, Jessica.
Excellent job, both of you. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well,
right, so that takes care of everything we've had on the agenda for today.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody. It was wonderful seeing you all. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Everyone.
Recording stopped.